It's Wednesday, the 29th of October, 2014, and this is Ecotastic. My name's Robin Yellow, and with me, as he is every week, is Kit Knowles.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi, Kit. Had a good week. I've heard you've been doing some stuff in a big arts and crafts mansion this week.
Yes, it's really exciting to be able to kind of delve back 100 years, 1903, so it's a little over 100 years. And we were kind of getting in and around. They had a butler's pantry, which I found quite amusing, alongside all sorts of stained glass and leaded lights for the original arts and crafts period. It was absolute stunner as an original piece, so I was really excited to be involved there. And we've got a big project. I think we want to drive £250,000 into energy saving and reshaping, so that's going to be quite an exciting project.
And you're going back to school?
And I'm going back to school with a lot of girls. I'm going back to girls' school. I'm going to Manchester Grammar.
Say you never left.
This is some may well say that, but I'm quite glad to have left because I'm feeling a little bit sweaty at the thought of having to present to over 100 teenager girls. It's going to be interesting, but hopefully create the next generation of eco-sustainability bods.
Great. Well, that sounds fantastic. Love to hear about that on next week's show. For now, let's start with the news. Our first article comes from the telegraph.co.uk from the Green Edit section on sustainable packaging. And while some brands are looking to reduce the weight of containers, which in turn reduces the fuel consumption used in transportation, others are switching to biopolymers, or natural sustainable materials. And one such material is an alternative to petroleum plastics made from sugar cane, a natural and renewable resource. This has caught the eye of consumer products manufacturer Procter & Gamble, who cite their switch to Kit's favourite shampoo, Pantene Pro V Nature Fusion, and conditioners as offering significant environmental benefits compared to traditional petroleum-based plastic. It's thought that this new biopolymer allows for a reduction in fossil fuel consumption by more than 70% and releases over 170% less greenhouse gas. Now, Kit, you're a chemical engineer. What's a biopolymer?
Yeah, so biopolymers are very interesting. They're quite new. They are found in all sorts of products actually in your kitchen nowadays. So if you've ever had one of those little caddies that you put your compost into, the bag that you pour your compost into is likely a biopolymer because they're also compostable materials. So effectively we have a product in which is made up of lots of monomers to form a chain. Each monomer is a link in that chain, like a normal metal chain. You join them together to make a long chain, and they can either come from a barrel of oil or other sources, such as natural ones like biopolymers. And they can have all sorts of very interesting characteristics. But one of the things I note for shampoo and conditioner manufacturers, particularly Procter & Gamble, which is a very big chemicals company, is you've got to look at the barrel of oil that goes into making the actual shampoo that you put on your head. It's actually a huge number of the products that go into shampoos and conditioners are from a barrel of oil, which is not particularly healthy for your scalp. We've been testing all sorts of new and eco options from our local vegan supermarket, the Unicorn, up here in Chawton. And they're really fantastic alternative products. So I'd say as much as it's nice to see biopolymers replace our petrochemicals, I would try and drive the biopolymers and also using natural products in the shampoo too.
Of course, you have more hair than I do to take care of, and I'm not putting yak urine on this beautiful barnet for anybody.
No, fair enough. So put a barrel of oil there. A few carcinogens will do no problems.
Well,
that might be where you're going wrong, Robin.
Well, me. Right, let's move on. The Green Profit reports about a sustainable student village made from shipping containers. Now, while the young, active population of the Gaza Strip in Palestine has long ago left seeking better employment opportunities and quality of life elsewhere, the periphery town has received a boost from young energy and willpower from a new student village constructed by the students themselves made entirely out of recycled shipping containers. Now, Kit, what are the pros and cons of cargo texture?
Cargo texture, lovely little catchphrase. My sister's been talking to me about this. She's been doing studies in her architectural degree at the moment, and it's very big because I think it's been winning a few sort of RIBA style awards recently, and they've been doing sort of Frank Gehry and Frank Lloyd Wright style recreations using cargo containers, which has been quite exciting. I guess the benefit of it is there's huge quantities of cargo containers out there, lots of which get to the end of their lives in terms of usefulness. So it's effectively a waste product that you'll be diverting. So there's all sorts of pros from the kind of sustainability. It's another interesting fact is that in the UK, if you were to build 4 houses, the materials that you're using, the wastage from building those 4 houses would produce enough waste material to build a 5th house. So it's a massively wasteful process, building properties and getting a cargo container on the go. I can imagine would also completely transform that statistic. It's a very functional space because of its shape and size. I guess the biggest single downside is it's made of steel, solid steel, which is unbelievably conductive. So you need to be careful with thermal bridging, and you need to be careful with condensation. So there would still be some elements you need to put in there, and also cutting sort of pipes in and out of it might be a little bit more of a challenge because you're cutting through solid steel again. But yeah, basically, I think it's a positive thing if you can do it cheaply.
And you talked then about what was it? Thermal
bridging.
Thermal bridging. What exactly is thermal bridging, and how would you stop it?
Thermal bridging is effectively a term used to describe a form of conduction. There's 3 forms of heat transfer: conduction, radiation, and convection. Radiation is the kind of, it's considered what's known as black body, or let's ignore radiation, that's more of a complicated one. And it's also a very, very small form of heat loss from any properties because we're quite cold bodies in a house at 20 degrees. So we're down to convection and conduction. Conduction is, it's warm inside your house, it warms your wall, and therefore your wall warms outside. And it's kind of an indirect form of heat loss. It goes through your wall. So the properties of that wall depicts how fast that loses energy. And again, convection, just to finish there, is where your hot air inside finds gaps in the wall and just shoots straight out directly. So thermal bridging isn't to do with convection. It's to do with conduction, and it's where you've got a wall where you've tried to insulate it, typically, and you find that there's a spot in the insulation that's being bridged by a conductive element. And the downsides of thermal bridging are excessive heat loss, but primarily the issue is that on the inside you get a very, very low surface temperature because, of course, that element's much more conductive than the surrounding materials. And then what happens is water forms on it because the air surrounding it hits the dew point because it's a very cold surface. So it can cause damp in your property.
Indeed. Indeed it can. Thank you very much. And talking of hot air, let's move on to the next article. BBC, ITV and Sky get green kick in the arts with new sustainability mark. Now, the Albert Plus scheme asks TV productions to address sustainability challenges, and programs that address key issues will be displaying the logo in their credits. Now, of course, it becomes easier to measure the environmental impact of television production since 2010, when BBC created this Albert system, a carbon calculator for TV shows. But it soon became clear that simply recording the impact of production was no guarantee that its findings would ignite action to reduce it. Now, there are a lot of these green mark schemes. Kit, do you think they work?
I guess this is on a particular... I bundle a lot of these sorts of elements together. Broadly speaking, whenever you're talking about sort of marks or schemes, sort of in the construction industry, we talk about BREEAM or LEED or Code for Sustainable Homes or Passive House. All of these are sort of certificates or standards that you try and achieve with building quality, and marks can show the same in that it's showing that you may have achieved something or that you're displaying something. So all of these get bundled together. I think that if the market is asking you to jump through a bunch of arbitrary hoops, I think it's a very negative thing to have. And generally those who use it and actually work with it in an industry, I don't think it has much benefit from there. However, what all of these schemes do is pop up in the news and get people to ask questions. And one of the things I do think is fantastic about any of this is that you get a lot more of the kind of the Joe blogs out there, getting interested or understanding that people are considering it. So it becomes more mainstream, and that's really important, is the kind of education of the nation, the spreading the word and getting people to take action. So pros and cons, but all of it nothingness, really.
The education of the nation.
Glad you like that.
I believe the children are our future. Let's move on to the GigaOhm article. This everlasting battery made from recycled vanadium and ready to plug in, and after a decade of development, GigaOhm reporting that $100 million in funding and some twists and turns, including a name change, a Silicon Valley startup, Imagy Power Systems, will try saying that after a few pints. Will soon start shipping the next generation of its batteries made from recycled vanadium. The 50 kilowatt battery will be available next month and can store up to 200 kilowatt hours of electricity, using vanadium recycled from mining and power combustion industries, as well as environmental waste. Now, in the pre-show, Kit, you said you knew nothing about vanadium. Has anything changed in the last 15 minutes?
Well, I knew nothing about the batteries. Vanadium's just an element in the periodic table. So, I mean, the reality is that we can use all sorts of things to create the potential that you require to create electricity from a battery. So things like lithium is a very commonly banded around element, which goes into battery manufacture. And vanadium, like lithium and like a lot of these, are actually quite expensive, quite rare elements. And I guess one of the biggest downsides to battery manufacture, or I guess not downsides, one of the biggest challenges in battery manufacture is actually finding something that will provide all of the benefits of things like vanadium and lithium, but without actually having to utilize these quite rare elements. And I guess what they're doing there is they're finding used sources of it, which in the short term I can see would provide benefits. I think it would be interesting to delve into that a little bit more and understand the actual reserves of vanadium in these areas that they're getting it from. You mentioned two there, didn't you, into sort of a post-industrial waste and other bits and bobs. So it would be interesting to see how much is there and how much energy is going into actually refining it, extracting it back out of its used form and getting it transferred into a battery. So the kind of life cycle analysis, the cradle to grave or cradle to cradle analysis, those are really important things to apply to that. But broadly speaking, if we can get batteries scaled up, ones that hold their charge for a long period of time and are capable of massive energy storage at what we call a grid level, then we've solved one of the kind of big challenges of our time. And that's what I'm really looking forward to. Scalable batteries, which can go up to massive scales, would be absolutely fantastic, a total game changer.
One to keep an eye on. And talking of energy sources, an article here from Inhabitat talks about Kenya opening the world's largest single turbine geothermal plant. And the Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta has just opened the world's largest single turbine geothermal power plant, which will add 140 megawatts to the country's national grid. Now, can you just explain what geothermal energy is?
Yeah, a lot of people get confused when they talk about geothermal because they believe that geothermal has something to do with heat pumps, which it does not. And a lot of people band heat pumps around as geothermal technology, which it is not. Geothermal in its strictest sense is where you're actually tapping into a heat source in the Earth's crust. So this is where you're getting very elevated temperatures from geothermally active areas. So Iceland, for instance, is the most commonly touted when you talk about geothermal sources. They have a lot of geothermal capacity, and they're actually using these. You see the geysers and all these hot springs
I
around
can't see any
Iceland.
teasers on there. Just
They must be drilling down to access it. It's either where it comes to the surface or near the surface, and then you can drill down to access it. In fact, very interestingly, there was a proposal put in about 3 years back to create enough geothermal power from a seam that runs under Manchester to drive 20,000 homes. So it's actually relatively more common than you'd expect, but the cost of setting geothermal up is the big downside. Once it's in place, it's a really fantastic technology, which personally I would say is very different to heat pumps, which I'm not a big fan of, on the basis of they're consuming electricity and using that to intensify a very small temperature gradient between the ground outside and the room inside. So geothermal, not heat pumps, good technology, especially if you can get the capital outlay and tap into some geo-specific spots.
Well, 140 megawatts, not to be sniffed at, of course. And I would have thought if I was out in Kenya, I'd just lay a load of PV down and probably get the same effect. But what do I know? Eddy Energy reported the government is very far from their low carbon heating goals. They've got a long way to go to achieve their aim of 25% of heating demand being met by low carbon sources by 2030, according to the Worldwide Wrestling Federation's latest energy report. Warm homes, not warm words. What's going on here, Kit?
Well, can you fire up the article so I can have a little look through it? But the WWF, your World Wrestling Federation,
I know nothing about it.
Well, I think the Panda's got something to say about that, but no, it isn't something I have a massive degree of knowledge on. Have you got that fired up? Oh, you've gone all.
Yeah, fill in. Dead air is a crime.
All right. Okay. So. I mean, okay, it's coming from that perspective. Sorry, I did totally miss your introduction, but effectively, all this is it's another update which says that we're not hitting our targets, and it's evident. It's been self-evident for years, and the reality is that when we've got targets like the 25% reduction, I think we're about 1/3 of the way there. We're nowhere near on target, and this is all coming out of things like the greenest government ever, touted by the Conservatives, having very, very little impact. In fact, a lot of things being abolished and dumbed down, and money reverted other places. So yeah, the whole kind of outcome is we started off well, we pledged a lot, and we're nowhere near it, on the basis that at every stage we try to pull away from it. And tapping into things like fracking reserves is going to absolutely kill this, because if you start to find more traditional style products of energy, then you're going to push back the need to develop renewable sources. And of course, everything about fracking, particularly with the methane release, is a very carbon intensive source of fuel, which is counter to a lot of people thinking that gas is green, which it is not. So in this situation, it is just kind of stating the obvious. It's not really news. It's, I guess, just an update.
Interesting that the Worldwide Wrestling Federation here think that heat pumps should become the heating technology of choice in lower density suburban areas, and you don't agree with that?
Absolutely, categorically not. I mean, let's just quickly again on heat pumps. The big issue with heat pumps is that they're driven off electricity. Electricity currently is derived from, in this country, vast majority is derived from oil, gas and coal. It has then got huge losses involved in generating this very high quality energy source. It's then transported way across country to your property where you've got your heat pump, and it's then utilized to derive energy in terms of thermals. So the big issue with this is that you're in a position where you could be deriving that energy from biomass or even gas. Gas alone would be 2.5 times carbon less intensive than driving it from electricity. So the reality is that also heat pumps are very complicated. They're not very well maintained in properties, and you find that these things drop out their COPs, their coefficients of performance. They get sold on 4s and 4.5, and actually the Energy Saving Trust has just done their biggest study ever and come back with the average of the best being about 2.8 as a COP. So all in all, heat pumps are not a valuable sort of energy mix, I would suggest, particularly economically when you consider electricity is 15.5 pence per kilowatt and gas is only 4.5 pence per kilowatt. So all of these elements suggest that you should absolutely avoid it. I know WWF there are talking about it from a
Worldwide Wrestling
Federation. They're talking about it from the perspective of kind of more rural-based dwellings where you've not got the alternative of mains gas, but then things like biomass now with all the automation that's coming into it, it's incredible. You can have lorries turn up, feed your hoppers with energy. When you're in or out, it's irrelevant. It's all direct debited, so you don't need to even think about it. There's little switches in your hoppers that tell you you're empty. It will feed itself, light itself, control the oxygen in itself, and the whole thing will effectively run carbon neutral, which I think leads us on to the tech corner, doesn't it?
It does, and that's the only thing I do on this show is link one thing to another. And you've unbelievable. You're not going to replace me with a robot.
Sorry, apologies.
It'd probably do a better job. But as Kit said, we'll now move into Kit's Tech Corner, and this week we're going to be talking about vital energy, biomass, and biomass CHP. What does CHP stand for, Kit, and why is biomass such a great thing?
I think we touched on CHP previously. It stands for combined heat and power, and this is actually a big element as to why power plants generating that electricity we just spoke about are so inefficient, because a huge quantity of the energy comes out in a form of low-grade heat energy and can't all be transferred into this very, very high-grade electrical energy. So what CHP is basically working on that basis, in that it's utilizing both the electrical energy that it can generate and also the heat, which of course you have demands of both in a home. So the idea of CHP is that you can use one flame, one source of heat, and you can derive both electricity and a heat source to heat your hot water and to heat your home. And the beauty of this vital energy side of things is it's looking at CHP, which is derived from biomass. So not only will you get your heat and your electricity, but it can be produced from a log or a chip or a pellet or miscanthus grass or a bale of hay. There's all sorts. The issue at the moment is scale. None of this is really suitable for the domestic scale, and there's no domestic products. But this is a technology like batteries that I've really got a keen eye on to see coming down to domestic scale in the future, because as you can imagine, it would be absolutely fantastic to be able to drive a carbon neutral source of energy and derive everything you need in a home from it. In fact, talking about that, there's also you're talking about CHP, that's called bigeneration. There's a form, or cogeneration, there's a form of trigeneration, which would be the kind of ultimate that we could achieve. Again, it's slightly more complex technology, slightly more money going in up front. But the beauty of that was it would mean, oh look, there you go, it's combined cooling, heat and power. So you could actually cool your house in the summer with it, heat your house in the winter with it, and produce all the electricity you require. What a wonderful concept that would be, all from a wood that you've cut down in the back of your garden.
Well, that you might have cut down from the back of your garden, Kit. Tell us about your forest.
Yeah, well, my garden is not quite big enough, I guess, to derive a year's worth of energy from, not unless I chop down one of my only 4 trees I own. So I have taken a bit of a lifestyle decision and purchased a woodland, which we've mentioned in passing. I think you'd take the mick out of me for. But it's an absolutely lovely thing to own. It's a broadleaf ancient woodland in Cheshire, but woodland is, well, I was about to say it's really cheap. It was really, really cheap, and still is if you buy it in North Wales, Cumbria or Yorkshire or somewhere in the east. But in Cheshire it's now becoming a real prime prime land, and it's kind of costing in around about £10,000 an acre. But the beauty of woodland is all sorts of tax benefits associated with it. In that you can, if you have portfolios of shares or anything at any point with lots of capital gains hanging around, you can actually consolidate all those capital gains, and you can use all the money that you would have had to pay to the government in capital gains. You can take all of that and shove it straight into a woodland as a purchase, and you can buy a woodland with that money that would have had to have gone to the government anyway. So it's effectively completely free money. And you're shoving that into a woodland that's commercial. You can then pay somebody to manage it, so you don't even need to think about it, and you can derive income from it. And the income you derive from it, also very nicely, is completely income tax free. So if you are sort of higher taxpayer and you want to use this money to go for what I would consider one of the best possible uses of money, which is to propagate sustainable woodland in the UK. You could do some fantastic things, and it doesn't stop there. There's all sorts of enterprise schemes and other fantastic ways that you can generate serious income and do real good at the same time in woodland, and get free fuel for your home and family and friends, which, Robin, you may benefit from in the future.
Well, exactly, and I like the sound of saving money and saving the planet at the same time. And in fact, do you know, it's interesting because, you know, I own an electric car, and one of the great things about an electric car in the UK is it saves you money. There's a 6-way tax break on an electric car, and I think actually part of sustainable that people often forget is that sustainable often means cheap. And when it comes to your forest, you've got a tax break, you've got somewhere great for the kids to play, and you've got unlimited free fuel.
Absolutely, and I love it.
And you love it. And that's a great note, I think, on which to end this week's show. Great show, Kit. Thanks very much for your contribution this week. This has been Ecotastic. If you want to add some stories that we can consider in the news segment, go to our subreddit at ecotastic.reddit.com. And better than that, make sure you tune in next week and subscribe to our YouTube channel by putting the search term Ecotastic into YouTube. Beware though, YouTube for some reason converts the word Ecotastic to Egotastic, which looks like a big collection of German porn. But what would I know?
Looking forward to it.
Great. Now, see you next week, Kit, and everybody, thank you and goodbye.